Hi, my name is Tim Peterson, and I am currently the Director of Assessment at the Madison Metropolitan School District in Madison, Wisconsin. As we get started in this course, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, some background, which will allow you to maybe get a better take on where I'm coming from, what my perspective is on things. I began my career as a high school science teacher. I am certified in broad field science, biology, chemistry, and physics, so all the good stuff. I worked in many school districts, from a small district in which the graduating class was 19 students my first year there, to larger districts. I also spent some time teaching in a school in Medellin, Colombia. So I have a perspective that I can bring to the table of having worked overseas as well. After about 15 years or so of teaching, I moved into the curriculum area because I thought I could have a greater impact on more students than just those that I was serving through the classroom. And so I began my career in administration. I've been in small districts as well as in large. Madison Metropolitan happens to be the second largest in the state of Wisconsin. We have 27,000 students in 50 schools. From that, I was in a couple of smaller school districts as the curriculum director, and then I came to Madison where I was in charge of the science program, and finally made the step into assessment, and here I've been. So what I'd like to do is take a little bit of time to talk about what I call the story that data is telling us. And I would hope that you can understand this a little bit from my perspective, in that this journey that we take with students really involves multiple ways of knowing whether or not students actually know what we're teaching them. And so when I talk about a journey or the story that data tells, it really is a culmination of multiple things that may or may not appear in standardized assessments, or in the type of pencil paper assessments or computer-based assessments that we often see the results of. So just as in any good story, there are questions that are raised. I would hope that you would also have questions that you can bring forward when we start looking at real data. And these are the kinds of questions that you could ask people when when you're involved in student-centered coaching, the coaching model. So let's take a look at a set of data that is actually, we'll start with a personal set, and then we'll take a look at others as we move forward. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I began doing something that people sometimes take for granted, but I'd never done. I started running. I hated running. I hated it. I would never do that. And then I changed the way I looked at the world and said, I can do this. I'm not fast, but I have set some goals and work to achieve them. One of the things that I did is I said, after a while, I thought anybody who runs a marathon is crazy. So I'm crazy now because I've run 3. So let's take a look at some of those 3 marathon data points that we have and see what you can tell about me and about those particular races. What story does this data tell? So I'm going to click over to share with you some information on what I did in each one of these races. And so let's start with the first one, my first ever marathon called the Whistle Stop. I ran that in 3 hours, 58 minutes, 56 seconds. I was pretty pleased. As being an old guy, that was pretty good. I ran a second marathon called Grandma's Marathon. That happens to be in Duluth, Minnesota. And I ran that in 4 hours, 5 minutes, 26 seconds. And then my third marathon that I just completed not too long ago was the Madison Marathon. This particular marathon I ran in 5 hours, 2 minutes and 28 seconds. So right away we begin to say, what's going on? Is Tim's age actually showing as we go from the top to the bottom? Let me give you some more information and see where we go from here. All right, So when I started the Whistle Stop Marathon, it was a temperature at the start was 28 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 2.2 centigrade. So that just gives you an idea of what it was like. There was a little bit of frost on the leaves of the trees, and but it was a good morning. Start temperature at the Grandma's Marathon was 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was definitely warmer. And the temperature at the start of the Madison Marathon was 16 degrees, almost negative 9 Celsius. So this should bring to mind several questions. And you could probably start listing them, saying, what was the difference between number 1 and number 3? Let me tell you a few things that aren't evident. The Whistle Stop, the first marathon. For my first marathon, I wasn't going to be, really bold and just do something crazier. This marathon is 26.2 miles, all downhill. Starts on an abandoned railroad bed, and the grade is 3%, and I was going downhill for 26.2 miles. I was no fool. If this is going to be what I'm going to try and do, then let's start going downhill. The second one was not so much. It definitely was an uphill marathon, and at about mile 21 is something they call Lemon Drop Hill, and it is about when people normally hit the wall, and they ended up struggling at that point. Not so much there. The third one, the Madison Marathon, was a series of pretty steep inclines as it went 26.2 miles throughout the city of Madison. So what questions do you have regarding this? Are the kinds of things that you should be asking. You should ask about, well, what was my diet like? What was my training like? And at some point, if you're ever interested, I will tell you about those things, but not right now. Let's take a look at some other data, and we will look at data that I have from a school district report card. And this particular report card is for a school given by the state, and this is a public document. So the data that I'm going to be sharing with you as we move through this course is generally publicly available information, so I'm not getting in trouble with anybody regarding private secure data. So this particular school, given a report card from the state, and let me just outline a couple of things that you may or may not know about the state of Wisconsin and their state report card. Over on the left, we have a general overall score. You can see the scale that is used, so it's not only stars, but points based on 100. So this particular school exceeds the expectations that we have for our schools, and it has 4 out of 5 stars. Over here on the right are several areas of pertaining to students. Student achievement is how did our students do based on the state assessment compared to at this school compared to those at the state. This is an elementary school, so it is a K-5 school. Another thing that we can look at is, have you grown over time? Here are one of the 2 pieces of data that is important to think about: achievement or status. Where are you at as far as a level is concerned? And growth, how far have you moved since the last time we took this particular assessment? It's also very important to understand that in Wisconsin, we have some of the worst achievement gaps in the entire United States between white students and African American students. And so this closing gaps is a critical piece in our strategic plan, our strategic framework that we have as a district to ensure that we're serving all our students. This particular school, we have both in English language arts and in mathematics. We definitely seem to be closing some gaps by comparison to the state. Another piece of data that you see is graduation, not applicable, attendance rate. How are we doing as far as attendance is concerned? How are kids doing in their progress towards reading? And since this is not a school that has 8th grade, it's not looking at 8th grade mathematics. The state of Wisconsin does have data that is weighted based on the percentage of free and reduced students that you have in your school district. So let's take a look at this particular school, actually. It is an elementary school. It has 500 students. And you can see the breakdown that of race, ethnicity. We're going to be taking a look at this kind of a breakdown throughout the course. So we're going to be looking at American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino, et cetera, et cetera. We'll also be taking a look at different groups that we're providing services for: students with disabilities, those that are economically disadvantaged, and English learners. And you can see right away here, this stands out down in the student groups, that the economically disadvantaged, or what we used to say were free and reduced lunch students, is 4 out of 10. So 4 out of 10 students at this particular school, or roughly 40%, are living a life that is they're struggling. Money is an issue. We can also see that the race ethnicity of this group, of this particular school, it's about half of the students are white, and then the rest of the students, the other half, are students of color. Finally, on this list, we can see that we have test participation information. The requirement by the state is that 95% of all students in all student groups actually take the test. We can see that our all student rate for this school, both for English language arts and for mathematics, for the prior year is over that mark, as well as the 3-year running average. Same thing is true, except we're not quite there with our lowest subgroup, which is participation rate for students with disabilities. This particular document goes on 4 pages. It then breaks down how did we actually come up with these numbers, etc. That's not what I really want to focus on. What I want you to think about are, what are the other pieces of data that are not listed here that may tell a more complete story of this particular school? We don't know, for instance, how did each one of these particular groups of students do in regards to their test scores. Did we have a significant gap here? We get this generic number up here that it says we're closing gaps. But what about down here in each one of these subgroups? We also know that our students with disabilities are not being tested as completely or to the same level that we're expecting all our students to be tested. Why is that? One of the things that you don't know about Madison is that we have a relatively robust parent initiative that they are asking their students to opt out of the state test. And as a district, we comply with those requests. And so if we take a look at the percent participation, is that play a role in these particular numbers? How many students are opted out? They do not count as participating in the test, so where is that? What does this look like for all the groups? What about where we see a potential gap? Hispanic students and African American students traditionally have had achievement gaps within the district, and what about those students? Compare those to the students who are white in those families. Who is opting out more? What else? What other questions come to mind as we see this? We see that we're struggling with student achievement. That doesn't tell us which groups are struggling. We do have some considerable growth. That's good. Again, which groups are growing? What does that mean? What about attendance rate? Down here, we see that, that the attendance rate is pretty good. It's higher than the state average. Is that associated with specific groups of students? Is it students with who are economically disadvantaged over those who are not? Is it English learners? Speaking of English learners, this does not tell us how they're progressing. It does not tell us that they are making the move from being an English learner to English proficient. Nowhere is that stated within this particular report card. So these are some of the questions that I would ask as we as we look closer at this and understand that this report card is a step in the right direction of sharing data, but it is used by too many people in a way that is I'm not going to call it wrong, but it's questionable. You can imagine that real estate agents will grab a hold of this report card, and as they are in a house for sale, they'll show this report card and say, if your children go to school here, you buy this house, your children go to school here, you will be at this kind of a school, without really asking or understanding what data is present and what data is not, rationale for that, etc. So using this to rank schools within a district for whatever perspectives or personal reasons you have is not what this is expected for. This is something that is to be used by the schools to help improve and compare where they are so they know which areas, for instance, student achievement, the school needs to work on. All of that being said, this is a document that is publicly available. And when we see publicly available documents or when we see data at all, keep in mind the following. There's more to the story than just numbers. Whenever and I will say this again and again, I tell my staff this, I tell everyone who would listen, one single data point does not describe a student as a learner. We need at least 3 data points, in which to make any kind of educational decision, and they should be from a broad range of perspectives. We'll get more into that as we take a look more closely at data and throughout the course of this particular class. If you have any questions that you want to connect with me about, please don't hesitate to connect with me via email. Thank you.